Welcome to Globe Watch with me, Charles Ebune. American companies pledged $37 billion of investments in Africa at the end of the first ever U.S.-Africa summit held in Washington, D.C. this week. Practically speaking, that is an essential good news to Africa's young people, estimated to make up about 70% of the population. But be careful. Widespread corruption, illusions of immigration for better, greener pastures in Europe, and illicit financial flows can prevent them from enjoying the benefits of the new frontier markets in the world. Africa today is one of the growing economies, at least the fastest, as everybody wants to get its own share of the African economy. My first guest on the program today is a world banker. He works at an institution which has been shaping Africa's economic outlook since the end of the Second World War. I'm talking about the World Bank. And my first guest is the World Bank Vice President for Africa. Mactar Diop, thanks very much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you, Charles, for receiving me on your...
I just want to inquire from you at a time when the African economic environment is changing. How much cash are you investing in Africa today, and in which areas?
We've been investing this year. The World Bank has been lending $10.6 billion to African countries, which is $10.2 billion of our IDA window, which is quasi-grant, and 0.4 in IBRD, which is a country which are middle-income countries. And the share of lending to middle-income countries will increase because Africa is growing and the country are becoming richer. So next year, we think that we'll be able to, in addition to that, to the window to the poorest country in Africa, we'll be able to add something around $1.6 billion that will be lent to middle-income countries in Africa.
In what areas are you investing that money?
Infrastructure is a big component of our. I would say that more than 60% of our portfolio is going to infrastructure. It's infrastructure because today one of the constraints to sustaining growth and to increasing productivity in Africa is the infrastructure gap. We don't have enough energy. Just picture the things. There are some countries which are producing electricity at 45 cents a kilowatt. Or you go to some part of the world, it's around 6-7 cents. How that country can be competitive if it doesn't solve that issue? So this is the kind of question that we're trying to tackle. But there is a good thing in Africa, is that we have the solution here in the continent. And what I visited yesterday in Lampangar is a type of solution that we are thinking about for the continent. Harvesting the potential of the African continent to bring solutions and to help really the continent as a whole to sustain growth and to be able to be part of the worldwide competition and to be able to take a larger share of the world economy. As we speak, this is already happening. When the GDP of Nigeria was rebased, it was increased by 80%. When the GDP of Ghana was rebased, it was rebased around 60%. So not only things are happening in Africa, but the picture are not telling the full story. The full story is even rosier than what the current numbers are telling us.
Africa faces so many challenges, and one of them is cash running out of the continent, and we need that money for development. The Kofi Annan report says that $50 billion yearly, about $80 billion lost to wars since 1990, investments about 80 billion, about 30% of that money is left. How are you going to help African countries, the World Bank, to make sure that that money remains in Africa and it is used to trigger people impacting growth?
Exactly. This is something that head of state themselves ask us to work with. It's a concern. It's a concern that such an amount of money is illegally moved out of the continent. If it was on a legal basis, that would not be a problem, because this is normal to be able to repatriate benefit when you're making investment. But we're talking about is illegal flows of resources. And it takes many components. One of them is the receiving countries. And the G20 have started working on this already. They're starting to tighten up their regulation to ensure that the financial sector doesn't encourage, doesn't support this flow of illegal resources. On the other side, African countries have asked for the report that President Thabo Mbeki also was involved in it, to be able to identify the condition under which we can stop this flow. Both of these have something in common, is the financial and banking sector regulation. As you know, the 2008 crisis shows that those fragilities are not only linked to African countries, but there is more regulation that needs to be included to be able to control some of the transaction and some of the... So there is an agenda which is right now going on, and I believe by the end of this calendar year, the G20 and African countries will be able to sit around the table and set a common agenda and be able to implement a certain number of measures that will improve the governance in the financial sector and also create incentive for this money not to move out. This will really, it begs another question, is that how can we increase the level of returns of investment in Africa and reduce the uncertainty, the perception of risk that people have of investing in Africa. And that's something also that the progress has been made, and the World Bank is working with those countries to make sure that really the way they are reading the risk of investing in Africa is linked to the reality of economic development. And today there is still a perception which doesn't reflect really the real risk which is attached to investing in Africa.
One but last question, Mr. Vice President. Africa's economic perspectives have changed. There is a power shift from South Africa being the economic giant of the continent to Nigeria, according to current statistics. How is the World Bank managing these new economic shifts in Africa?
We're managing by working with everybody. You know, when what you want to see is to have actually more and more of the Nigeria,
Certainly,
South
you listen
Africans.
more to Nigeria now more than to South Africa.
I listen to everybody. I listen to everybody equally, and it's a very important point. We are cooperative in our institution, and we believe that every country should be treated equally. It's not because a country is temporarily facing some difficulty or have an income per capita which is lower than another country that it should be treated differently. So I believe strongly the same. We believe that African countries should be treated equally when it talks to international affairs, because the basis of the treatment should be the sovereignty of a country and not the level of incomes generated by the country.
Okay, finally, the BRICS just created an alternative bank in which, when I watch CNN and BBC, they call it an anti-dollar institution, anti the World Bank or the Bretton Woods institution in general. This new bank created by South Africa, China, Russia, Brazil, India. Certainly the World Bank will be running out of clients very soon in the years coming.
There is space for everybody, everybody.
Okay.
Do you think that today one can finance all the needs of Africa economic development? The needs are huge, are immense. So there is space for new BRICS banks, there is space for the World Bank, there is space for bilaterals, there is space for the capital market, there is space for everybody. And as African, we should just welcome everybody as long as it helps us growing. And I lived 3 years in Brazil. I was director for the World Bank in Brazil. I am not sure that what is mentioned in the paper is the way BRICS countries are seeing it. I don't think at all that they're seeing their bank as being antagonistic to the World Bank. At the opposite, reading the Brazilian press, I see policymakers in Brazil say that they would like to make sure that our institutions are all working together, and I believe that's what we're hearing from other countries. So there is space for everybody as long as we are working for the African people.
Okay. The World Bank Vice President for Africa, Makhtar Diop, thanks very much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you so much, Charles.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
You just listened there to the World Bank Vice President for Africa, Makhtar Diop. And my second guest of the program is a mixture of philosophy, religion, and motivational speaking. Reverend Gerard Ebile, thanks very much for accepting our invitation on Globe Watch today.
Well, the honor is mine to be right here with you today, and I believe that we're going to have a nice time together.
The Chinese have promised huge financial investments in Africa. In reality, Chinese trade links with Africa today accounts $206 billion. The US is promising $37 billion. The Japanese have already pledged about some $33 billion. This is huge money for Africa. But let me just give you some statistics. About 1 million African young people leave the continent yearly, destination Europe alone. And about 299,000 of them seek asylum in Europe. All this good news, probably they are not going to enjoy it. How should we invest in them?
One of the things I believe that is actually plaguing Africans is the understanding of the strategies to be able to evolve to a place of prominence. I think help is good, but sometimes there are some helps that come to kill our potentials. And that's what we've not realized for a very long time, and it has kept us under the mercy of other European countries. I believe that every country that ever evolved to prominence had some vital strategies put in place and a level of understanding that took them to that place of evolution. If we look very well, you get to discover that most of these nations which are celebrated today never began like that. Some years back, America was not the way it is today. And I don't think that some country gave some billions into that country before the country evolved like that. What would ignite change or transformation in a nation is not money. I think that the strength of growth and development in every community is in the quality of the mindset the people possess.
And there you go about education. When you talk about the quality of the mind, the problem of mentality, how should we change that today?
Well, one of the things I've understood is that in Britain, you realize that in Britain, like other developed nations, people with ingenious ideas are being encouraged, being motivated. But actually, our nation does not propagate that. If you look at it, even our educational system is a borrowed one. When a nation has been able to exploit some ideas, concepts, and they see it that its time has evolved, they ship it to us. What we've borrowed from most of the Western nations are what they have evolved beyond. And when they give us, we would be appreciating it because it took them to where they are. But when we begin to assimilate it, we only grow to the highest height which they have left. So we can never grow above them. I believe that every society, every community, if people are given room to provoke and encourage creativity, will come out with ingenious ideas that will be relative to our environment. Sometimes borrowed ideas might not be able to complement the plights and the challenges of our environment.
One major factor which has been holding Africa down it's corruption. And you know that the U.S. administration is a value system administration, meaning if you don't respect certain benchmarks of what the Americans expect, this money may not come in. America is a system of democracy, justice, the rule of law, the absence of corruption, good governance practices. How should we enhance such practices across spectrums in Africa today to make sure that these investments which are coming in, because you said that America did not need help, Britain did not need help, other countries, but we know of the Marshall Plan, which at the end of the Second World War, which redefined Europe today. So do we really lack good governance in Africa for things to be the way they are today?
Well, if I'm going to be very straight with you, you get to realize that most African countries which they assume they are practicing democracy. But if you look at it, actually, it's not democracy they are practicing, because if they were practicing democracy, then the systems of governance would have been same with other countries which they are practicing democracy. I believe there is a canker in Africans which is deep-rooted beyond what we see today. I believe this mind canker is genetical, because we are evolving from a culture which we have this chiefry mentality, where people who rise up to leadership don't want to leave leadership. You know, chiefs in our time, they grow and they get old till they die in position of leadership. And that is a very selfish approach towards governance if we're going to evolve. I believe that every person who comes into leadership have ingenious creativity that can be able to add to the system. But if we continue to maintain one standard and one approach, I tell you, we are going to have the same results. I tell people always, if my thinking does not change, the things around me that I experience will always be the same. If I want to evolve, I must update my reasoning. But then, if the system is so stereotyped, it becomes difficult for us to be able to experience that. Any system that can be able to evolve in order to refine this aspect, I think is going to be essential. Now, for example, let me bring this out. I think that if Cameroonians can be able to have a drift in their mentality.
Taking an African picture in large, because that is where my focus is. I don't want you to isolate to a particular country.
It is very possible that I can be able to isolate myself to a particular country because Cameroon is part of Africa, it's part of the world. And sometimes if Cameroon is going to evolve to a certain level, then we must be able to understand the global challenge of Africa. There is something very peculiar about Cameroon. Cameroon is Africa in miniature. They say it and they sing it like a song. But it goes far beyond what they can imagine. It implies that every quality that is in Africa is all imbibed in Cameroon. Now, I believe that we need more of creative avenues of educating Cameroonians to be able to exploit the resources they possess. Cameroonians, their problem actually might not be the leaders right now. The problem is that we're too lazy enough to be able to go to do independent research. Cameroonians naturally don't like learning. Africans don't like learning. We're always looking for what can be
But you know that some of the best professors, some of the best medical doctors we have in the world today, some of the best economics, some of the best in nearly all the professions you have on earth today come from Africa. Let me rephrase this question to you. You are a preacher, a pastor, and a spiritual mentor to many at the same time. Spiritually, where is the dichotomy for development?
Well, I've been lately putting this down in prayers to be able to see a way forward. Because actually, the state of the nation in Africa has gotten to a state of deploration where a lot of people have been feeling as if there is no hope. But one of the things I got from the Lord is that everything Africans have been through, it has been a platform for preparation, not actually a problem, as per se people could think. Each time people go through challenges, it only gives room for their potentials to stretch. If you look in America, the black Americans are evolving very much in music because when they were under the
Ku Klux Klan
of the Ku Klux Klan, slavery and all that, they were forced to be creative to come out with something that can console them. I would want to assure Africans that we have some remnants in this Africa which are rising up with ingenious ideas. They are doing some things that will bring change in this Africa. I will tell you the honest truth. Though some people have been silent, they have been doing underground work. Because the greatest change that can ever come that we need actually is to change the minds of people. Some people might not be able to apply that in the general sense, but some people are taking some independent steps that are bringing change. I will tell you the honest truth. I, for instance, have not been sleeping or just praying. Because sometimes when we talk without acting, we don't do anything. We don't change anything. I spent so many years of my life trying to do research and trying to see how there could be a possibility for a transformation in this continent, Africa. I discovered that Africa is pregnant with a lot, but ignorant of what it possesses. If you can look it very well, gold is produced in Ghana, but coal is produced in England. You go to England, you find gold everywhere. You go to Ghana, you don't find gold anywhere. The reason is not because the goal is not in Ghana. The point is that people with a stronger mind would always rule those with a smaller mindset. If European countries want to truly help us, they should improve on our technology, not with money.
But you guys have to do that. You are talking about money. You know that the Kofi Annan report indicates that about $50 billion of illicit financial flow leave Africa each year, and that money is not taken out of the continent by the Europeans. So maybe time for the blame game should be over because you squander money in Africa. You know that, right?
I'm not blaming any European. I'm saying I'm blaming myself. I'm blaming you. I'm blaming Cameroonians. I'm blaming Africans. I'm saying we have to look critically and observe and think about what is the real thing that has caused other nations to evolve, other continents to evolve.
Is there a problem with the morale which affects development and distribution of resources?
Very important. If you look at it very well, I'm going to be very plain with you. I'm very practical. You as a person, you have a mindset concerning life. Whatever you want to pursue, you know the kind of people you need for what you're doing. And there is a kind of attitude or attributes I exhibit that might not encourage or inspire you to work with me. Which definitely implies sometimes if we don't develop ourselves, sometimes opportunities might be around us, but the opportunities will not embrace us. Opportunities might reject us, not because we are not good for the opportunities, but because we are not developed enough to be able to identify.
The church in particular has been part of this process. Do you have a feeling that the church has failed in contributing in this area?
Well, I wouldn't say the church has failed. The church has been working. And what has been seen of the church is not the true image of the church.
How do you justify that? Because you know that one characteristic of our society today is the increase of extremism, fundamentalism, terrorism. We have great preachers in Africa. You have TB Joshua in Nigeria. These are people who prophesy, but somebody can sit somewhere and say that, okay, it's good. They prophesy about other issues, but they are able to provide a spiritual solution to their continent's problem. Don't you think that the leaders of God or the men of God have somehow plundered?
Well, I will tell you that the Christianity in Africa is still evolving. Most of that which we have as Christianity in past time were borrowed. Most of the religious denominations that came to Africa were not originated from Africa. So they had gotten a better part of Africans. But today I want to assure you that there is a new generation of Africans rising up with a personal relationship with God, exhibiting new revelations and ideas that will bring a difference. You might not be able to judge and conclude most of the churches today now because some of them are still evolving. Some of these traditional churches have been for so many years. And each time a child is growing, when he's still a baby.
And there is a constant multiplication of the churches based on business transactions, because even when you enter the churches, I'm not indicting the church, but I'm talking about the reality is that in every quarter of Africa today, streets or everywhere, you see new churches coming up every day. And as soon as they get the money, the next day, the pastor travels to the US, he goes to Britain, he goes to Russia, he abandons the congregation. These money-minded churches which are coming up every day, don't you think that they are equally a problem?
What you are saying, you are not particularly wrong. In every sector of life, there is this manipulation. And we have people who have a survivor mentality. And in every good aspect in life, we always have people with the wrong mentality. There is no fear of existence where you will not find bad trying to infiltrate amongst good. But our focus should not be in the wrong things that are happening. We should look about people who are coming out with ideas, coming out with revelation from God that can be able to make a difference. Like I said, the church in Africa is still growing. All you need to do is to give some time. I will not deny the fact that we have a lot of pollution. The devil will never sleep. When he realizes something can bring change, he's going to infiltrate in the system. But I tell you, any man who truly believes in God will know what is right for God.
Okay, my audience is made up of believers and unbelievers, people who are atheists and non-atheists. Let us come back to a more practical issue, leadership, which of course is very essential for our development today. Barack Obama says a new Africa is emerging. With what kind of leaders?
Okay. I want to believe that to connect what I was saying previously and to get to this, I'll give you this assurance. The strategy of the church is changing. For example, for one, I have been able to have an encounter with God, which God gave me a new perspective and approach towards the church.
That encounter is for you alone, surely.
And that's why I want to give it in connectivity with what you are just saying.
Okay.
Now, everybody goes to church and everybody believes there is a God. But hear me very well. There is...
I still remind you that my audience is made up of believers and non-believers, atheists and theists.
True. And it's just to inspire every sector of existence, every group of people, every religion, and every people with a mindset and a belief that in their system, they should be able to inspire people to get to a place where they can be part of the change we want to see.
Okay. What kind of leadership for this new emerging Africa for the benefits to reach the ordinary man?
Simple. One of the things I would let people to do is like we should spend more time to look at ourselves, look at our nation, spend more time to do research, study other nations who began from nothing and became great. and look at their secret, and then we come back to ourselves, we work with ourselves, and try to do something different. Because if we are applying a particular strategy and it's not taking us where we desire to get to, then we need to reinvent ourselves. I will tell you the honest truth. There is going to be a political revolution in Africa. There is going to be an educational revolution. I'm speaking prophetically. There is going to be an economic revolution. Men from different sectors. It's already
taking place.
That's what I'm telling you how the change is going to come. There are people who have been tired of this dilemma for a long time. And the fact that they are not talking, it doesn't mean they are not doing anything. Personal initiatives are going on the ground. People are trying to
Can we have some of them? Are you part of those personal underground initiatives?
Well, it's simple. That's why I was saying on my part, I'm trying to inspire the group of people who are inspired. Beyond church, I have a leadership institution to raise people who rise up with a perspective that goes beyond that which is governing our time. I tell people, for you to lead the crowd, if we are going to maintain it, we are not going to make a difference.
Final thought. There is substantial historical evidence of how the church contributed, especially to the collapse of communism in Europe. One historical book even puts the fact that on the night of the collapse of the Berlin Wall, it was through a prayer in Germany. You know of liberation theology in Latin America, how it contributed to the end of dictatorship and many other issues in Latin America. What kind of liberation theology should the African continent have to ensure that what the Latin American countries and the Europeans had, we can have it?
Okay, it's simple. What we have to do is that we should be praying that God should give inspiration to all leaders to be able to raise people in their different domains to rise beyond that which have been accepted as a standard. In the Indian Book Society of Engineers some years back, it was recorded that a metal object cannot fly based on their level of understanding. Every level of understanding that governs a society is never the best. The reason why life is evolving is because people are always thinking further than what has been generally accepted. The Wright brothers, based on their deep research, they came with an understanding of a law stronger than the law, which was a limitation and a hindrance to the top engineers of that time to believe that a metal object can fly. So they came with a law stronger than the law of gravity called the law of aerodynamics, and they flew the first plane. Everything called impossibility is just a state of mind.
Thanks very much for accepting to be guest on our program today. And I'm sure we're going to see next time.
Yes, I believe that we're going to meet. If you don't meet me, you're going to meet with my books.